is Andrew Pyle. I am an associate professor in the communication department. This is my 7th year at Clemson. So I teach courses in public relations, crisis communication, intercultural communication. My family lives on campus. We do the faculty and residence program. So we live in Mickle Hall, which used to be called Stadium Suites. I like to have a really discussion-based class. I have found that I enjoy class more if the classroom is a space where students are able to ask questions, where we're able to talk together about issues and make connections to what's happening in the real world, and then discuss those different issues together and make connections to what we're learning about, what we're studying. And so as much as possible, I really like the classes that I teach to really be more of a shared learning experience through discussion and engagement. So, sometimes that means there's some lecture. Sometimes we're doing, various kinds of activities and trying to apply what we're talking about. But most of the time, I really try to have a discussion going in the classroom. I think I teach because there's something deeply rewarding about being able to work with a student or a group of students over the course of time and see growth and development and see, change and see the way that students think differently about the world and interact differently with me and with each other. And, I think you've probably heard teachers talk about sort of the light bulb moment where you see the light bulb come on for someone. I got into teaching because I enjoy being able to work with students and help create opportunities. I am where I am today because because teachers, professors, because people because they poured into me, because they created opportunities for me. And so that's something I wanted to be able to do, is to do the same thing for students. And so, so I continue teaching, right? I still do this, and I still love this part of my job, because even when things are really hard, even when there's a global pandemic, even when, the world is in crisis, life is also still sort of moving along, and the world is still moving along. And to be able to sit down for an hour and 15 minutes and have conversations about important things, and to be able to talk about how we can better make sense of those things, and be better citizens and be better members of society, and how we can make a positive impact on the world around us. Yeah, I mean, that's something that I can have a really small part in helping to do that. That's really rewarding. We talk a lot about the idea in my courses on crisis communication, for example. We talk about resilience, and some people talk about resilience as being able to bounce back, but that's a misnomer, because when resilience suggests that there's been a crisis, that there's been something to shake up whatever the situation is. And so really, when you're talking about resilience, you're talking about the ability to bounce forward and to achieve renewal and to figure out what the new normal is going to look like. And I think that oftentimes our school system doesn't do the best job teaching students to fail well, to fail and learn from it and move forward with confidence. And that's hard to do. It's hard to fail. It hurts. But if we're not working to help students figure out how to fail gracefully and learn from that and move forward and to be resilient, to sort of bounce forward after failure, then I think we're doing a disservice to our students. And so I would love to to believe that at least some students are leaving my classes feeling a bit more educationally resilient and resilient in their relationships and their communication. I mean, obviously I teach communication, so I want them to be better communicators, but I think that's too vague in terms of what you take away, because excellent communication looks different in every context. So if I had to be more specific, I would say confidence and resilience are the two things that I most want my students to leave my classes with. Having taken the time to mentally prepare a little bit and to be ready to participate. So I think my students would tell you that this is a funny thing to say on a video interview that's going to be posted somewhere. I think my students would probably tell you that if you do the reading and you do the work and you show up and you participate, my classes are not hard at all. Because the things that I'm teaching are things that oftentimes seem really simple, right? They seem oftentimes very intuitive. They seem like things that maybe I didn't know that, but I feel like I should have known that, or it sort of makes sense now that we've talked about it. But at the same time, they are things that are easy to know and very hard to practice well. And so, you know, I teach PR writing, and it's a lot of work. But if you're doing the assignments and if you're participating in class, then you're learning what you need to. And if you're putting in the time, right, it's a lot of work, but it's not like it's rocket science. It's not something that's going to make you think, wow, I just had to sort of wring my brain out to do that. And it can be very challenging at times, but it's something that if you engage, if you're persistent, if you show up, and again, this idea of resilience, right? If you show up and you're really committed to being present, then you're going to do very well in my class. I try to notice if a student is maybe, if they seem a little bit checked out, or if they seem off, or if a student has been missing a lot of class. And sometimes it's something as simple as a quick email. Hey, how are things going? But I mean, in my classes, there's a lot of writing, and so I give feedback. So my students get ongoing feedback throughout the semester on their writing, on their work. And so there's this built-in feedback mechanism. And so if I see a student who's continuing to make the same kinds of mistakes over time, and maybe there's a disconnect between my feedback and their work, then I'll probably send a follow-up email and say, hey, just want to talk about this. You know, let's have a conversation, because there maybe what I'm saying isn't clear to the student, or maybe the student, you know, is having a hard time figuring out how to sort of take my feedback and apply it to whatever they're working on. But, you know, in terms of, other than the actual work, in terms of engagement, you know, if I have a student who's present and then suddenly they miss 3 classes in a row, I'm going to send an email, right? Because that's atypical. And I will say that it's been a lot harder during the pandemic, because it's really easy to miss, right, if a student is there or not. It's really easy in a Zoom room for students to pop in and drop out and not necessarily be sure that the whole class is there at a given point. So that has made it a lot more challenging to be able to stay in good connection with all of my students in all of my classes. I like the flexibility of online classes, specifically the function of breakout rooms in Zoom. So I love for my students to break out and have small group discussions in class, but it's hard to do that. You know, if you're over in Daniel and it's this classroom that, okay, technically you can have 25 people in there, but should you? You know, and if you want to have a small group discussion, there's no way to do that without every group sort of talking over every other group. And so it's possible, but it's not ideal. So to be able to say, all right, here's your prompt, here's your question, you're going in the breakout room for 3 minutes. You're going to talk about this, we're going to come back, we're going to debrief, we're going to share. That's something that you just can't do in the same way in a physical classroom. So that's been a real benefit. And honestly, my students have said in a couple of my classes that they really enjoy the flexibility that has provided for the really sort of more intimate level conversation among a small group of students that really isn't typically possible in a classroom. You know, I don't sort of make my students keep their camera on, but I ask them. You know, I ask them if they will, because it's just easier to have a discussion, a conversation, if I'm able to see faces on the other side of the screen. And but even then, sort of being on and being focused and paying attention and connecting with the camera like that, it is draining. And so I think that Zoom University is a really mentally taxing experience in a way that showing up to a physical classroom typically isn't. And so I think that people are really starting to feel the exhaustion and really starting to feel the weight of sort of being here in this space and not having the human connection of walking into a classroom and seeing your classmates and being able to have a little side comment conversation. You can't do that on Zoom. You can send a private message, but it's really not the same. Well, I already read a lot, and so I read more at times. My people talked about like, oh, I've taken up baking and now I have a sourdough starter. My wife already bakes a ton, and so she just started baking more, which was just bad for my health, but delicious. We did so we have 2 little boys, and so we spend a lot of time outside, a lot of time playing, enjoying the outdoors. Casual, unplanned interactions with friends and acquaintances. So I think I had not realized how much of a difference it makes to be able to just wander down the hall and have a conversation with one of the other professors. We have a very collegial department. We have a really healthy department culture and environment. I'm quite close with a lot of my colleagues here in Strode. And so a typical part of a day was I wander down and drink my morning coffee and chat with one of the other professors, you know, wander over and check in. And those day to day and week to week casual interactions have a pretty big impact on, I think, just my mental health and those relationships. And so I really deeply miss that. Crisis communication, how organizations respond to crises, organizations and communities, how they respond to crises. Most recently, I've been studying how organizations use social media to respond to crises. I'll say 2 things. First, Clemson students are great. So I have just, every semester, I'm so impressed with the work that my students are doing and with the ways that, students bring interesting examples and interesting, experience to the classroom. And it really adds such a neat facet to just the process of education. And so I love working at Clemson because Clemson students are great. But also from a more selfish or self-focused answer is that I've had a ton of opportunities here. I've had opportunities to teach classes I wanted to develop. I've had the opportunity to lead study abroad programs. I've had the opportunity to take on various kinds of research projects that I'm able to do because of the resources that exist here. You know, we have our social media listening center that's created so many opportunities that otherwise I wouldn't have had. Just this small college town. You can be on campus and you can walk in less than 10 minutes. You're in the middle of downtown Clemson. And I love that. I love that it's this very small and tight-knit community. My children were born here, right? So, well, not here, they're born in Greenville, but, raising a family here, there's so many moments. There, pre-COVID, oftentimes during the semester, my wife would bake a batch of cookies and bring the boys and come into my classes and deliver cookies to my students in the middle of class. Moments like that where it's kind of a nice, unexpected change of pace. The big thing when there's football in town is that, so let's say last year, because this year's different, right? But so Sarah, my wife, would get the boys and load up. And one of the things that would happen every home game is sort of wandering around to where all of our friends tailgate, dropping in, saying hi, getting a bite to eat, and then coming back, and she would make a batch of cookies or a batch of brownies when it was closer to kickoff, that she would then give out to the RAs, because there are RAs who had to be on call and had to be at the desk and working, and so it's game day and they have to work, and so she would always make some treats and give it to the staff. Time to get to know your professors. Go to office hours, sit down, chat with them, and look for opportunities to build those connections outside of the classroom space. It makes in the classroom experiences, I think, richer, because it helps the professor to learn the student as more than that person you see 3 hours a week or 2 hours and 45 minutes. And it helps the student to figure out that the professor is also a person.